Hey y'all. So today I want to talk about the Constitution. And I want to talk about how the Constitution pertains to two very divisive arguments in the American discourse today: masks and post-election rhetoric. And I'll explain what I mean by that later on. First, I want to tell a story. When I was in college, I took a constitutional law class. In this class, the very first day, first thing our professor said was that the Constitution is a lot like the Bible. A lot of people love it, and a lot of people hold it sacred. But a lot of those same people have clearly never read it. I think that that's true and poignant today, especially regarding these two conversations. So I want to talk about what the Constitution says about masks and about the election. And at the very end, I want to talk about my problem with the application of these two rhetoric, these 2 points of rhetoric by Red Hats and by Trump and by all of his supporters. So, I got this little handy-dandy thing. It's a little pocket constitution. If you've never been to the National Archives, I highly recommend that you go. You don't need one of these, but I just really like it, and it's fun at parties. No, if you don't have one of those, it's fine. It's open source. You can go online and you can cite it. All of the bits of the Constitution that I cite today, and a few more, I will be putting in the description down below. So don't worry. So masks. We're going to start with that. What does the Constitution say about masks? Well, we can look at Amendment 10, the 10th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which says, and I quote, "The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, and to the people." That last bit, "and to the people," I will touch on in a moment, but I want to just focus on this for a moment. The states are within their rights to issue mandates and laws, and actions that are necessary for the common good. The reason why this is to directly protect state sovereignty, so that the federal government, especially the executive branch, cannot just unilaterally say, "Hey, states, this is what you're going to do." This is why this is in there. This is why you'll hear a lot of Confederate apologists talk about the concept of states' rights. Well, yeah, states' rights to own slavery, but that's neither here nor there. Yes, states' rights are a thing, and that's what the 10th Amendment is all about. Now, a state can't just say this is the thing that's happening. They have to have due process. They have to be operating under best practices. Now, I am not a constitutional lawyer. I'm not a constitutional expert, but I have read the Constitution many times, both academically and as a leisure read, because I'm one of those weirdos. And it seems to me, and to just a load of constitutional experts, that if a state is looking at a pandemic that in under a year has killed over 250,000 people, 250,000 Americans, and they operate under the advice of experts such as doctors, nurses, epidemiologists, people who have been studying and practicing in this field and who have been, frankly, training for this very occasion for decades. If they consult this advice and they say, yeah, this is best practices, yeah, that seems like best practices in that situation. They are operating under what is the best health of their people and of their constituents. Essentially, the state government is doing their job. Now, the governor of Oregon, the state that I live in, my home state, Kate Brown has received some pretty nasty flack for how she's handled this. She's been called a tyrant. She's been called a dictator. There have been multiple attempts to recall her both during this and beforehand. I have my opinions as to why that is, and I think it really, a lot of it boils down to bigotry. Yeah. But that's neither here nor there. I personally think that Governor Brown has not done enough, in my opinion, to really kind of hammer this down. I think that in a lot of situations she's actually been very lax, and that's my personal critique and my personal opinion of how the governor has handled this. But I digress. The 10th Amendment states that the states are allowed to issue a mask mandate. That's the interpretation, and that's the interpretation that these states have used. Now, a pushback by a lot of the red hats and by a lot of the detractors of these mandates is that last little bit, or to the people. Now, it's very clear that we define what the people means. It means the people. It doesn't. It means the collective group, the whole of the people. It does not mean or to an individual. It doesn't mean or to a collective group of persons who exist in an echo chamber. It doesn't mean or to a group of individuals who don't like masks. It doesn't mean that, because it doesn't say that. It says or to the people. This is where things like referendum, this is where things like, sorry, I'm drawing a blank there. Oh, yes, this is where things like ballot measures come into play. So, the 10th Amendment is very clear on the Constitution, or the constitutionality of masks. Yeah, it's not a violation of your constitutional right. On to the martial law recount or revote rhetoric. Now, this one's a little tricky, but the 12th Amendment, which is an amendment that adds a little bit of clarification to Article 2 of the Constitution, which really at the time only covered elections of members of Congress, being the House of Representatives and Senate, but not necessarily the president. This really kind of clarifies that and hammers that down. It says, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. Again, I'm going to cite this below. It's really, really long. The electors shall meet in their respective states and vote by ballot for president and vice president, one of whom at least shall not be an inhabitant of the same state with themselves, They shall name in their ballots the person voted for as president, and in distinct ballots the person voted for as vice president. And they shall make distinct lists of all persons voted for as president, and of all persons voted for as vice president, and the number of votes for each, which lists they shall sign and certify, and transmit, sealed, to the seat of the government of the United States, directed to the President of the Senate. That's the Vice President. The President of the Senate shall, in the presence of the Senate and House of Representatives, open all the certificates, and the votes shall then be counted. The person having the greatest number of votes for President shall be the President, if such a number be a majority of the whole number of electors appointed. I'm not going to go any further. At this point, it starts they start kind of issuing redundancies. They go on to talk about, the 12th Amendment goes on to talk about what happens if there's a tie. And then they go on to talk about the very same thing, same exact language for the vice president. And then at the very end, it speaks on the fact that the vice president-elect cannot not be eligible for the office of the President of the United States. So there's that. That's the 12th Amendment. So a couple of things. So it talks about the electors. That's the Electoral College. The electors have made it very clear, some multiple times, that Donald Trump lost the election and that Joe Biden won the election. Donald Trump has issued multiple frivolous lawsuits against multiple states, which multiple times have come back and said, no, this is what the votes were. In fact, in doing so, he's actually widened his margin of loss in some states. Okay, so that's that. They've done their jobs. The elections commissions of all 50 states, of Washington, D.C., and of all U.S. territories, they've made it clear, either on the primary level or in the case of the territories, or on the state and D.C. level, in the case of the general election, that this is what it is. And they've done so multiple times. Now, there is that bit about the President of the Senate confirming the election in Congress. Now, this is where we get into U.S. Code. Title 3 of the U.S. Code, Section 15, states that this thing, the President of the Senate confirming the election in Congress, is to happen on January 6th, after the election, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So, January 6th, 2021, 1 p.m., Congress goes into session. That's what they discuss. Okay, that hasn't happened yet. We're not really going to discuss that. That first bit, the electors did their job. Not only did the electors do their job, they did their job multiple times to the same result. On to martial law. The Constitution, it states that the president is, the commander-in-chief of the armed forces and the militias, and there is something, again, we're going into U.S. Code, about martial law, and it's not really covered in the Constitution, but it is covered in the U.S. Code. primarily, primarily in Title 10 of the U.S. Code, sections 331 to 335. It's called the Insurrection Act of 1807. The Insurrection Act states that, be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled, that in all cases of insurrection or obstruction to the law, either in the United States or of any individual states or territory, where it is lawful for the President of the United States to call forth the militia for the purpose of suppressing such an insurrection or of causing the laws to be duly executed, it shall be lawful for him to employ for the same purposes such part of the land or naval force of the United States as shall be judged necessary, having first observed all the prerequisites of the law in that respect. That last part is really, really, really important. He doesn't have a legitimate claim to institute martial law unless there is mass insurrection. Say, mass insurrection of people attempting to commit violence, either in the name of him or Joe Biden. He would have right to do so. A prerequisite of instituting martial law is not to violate the already proven to not be fraudulent election. That's not what that's for. He is not in his right to do so. So, my final point, why I'm talking about this, is because I find it deeply disturbing that the same people who talk about the sanctity of the Constitution, the sanctity of freedom, of liberty, of democracy in this country, will then turn around and, in the same unmasked breath, advocate for something that is such a clear violation of the Constitution, of freedom, of liberty, of democracy, and frankly, of the rule of law. This sort of rhetoric, it's dangerous. It's dangerous because of who is pushing it. Not just of the rhetoric itself. The rhetoric itself is dangerous. But the fact that it's not a fringe group of Trump supporters that are pushing the rhetoric, but Trump's former advisor that he pardoned and the president himself are pushing this sort of rhetoric is absolutely dangerous. It's dangerous to the fabric of liberty, of democracy, of the rule of law, and yes, it's dangerous to the Constitution. We need to be very, very, very careful in the next few weeks that we do not allow such rhetoric to become anything more than rhetoric. The problem with rhetoric like this is just that. eventually, at some point, it either dies or it no longer becomes rhetoric. And that's what scares me. Wear a mask. Stay 6 feet apart if you can. Stay inside if you can. Take care of each other. And don't allow for liberty to die because some guy with a tinier ego than his hands said that the election was unfair because he lost. Because once you lose something like that, history has made it very clear that it's really hard to get that back. Y'all have a good day. Take care.